In 60 AD, Queen Boudica's rebellion wasn't just a clash of armies, it was a collision of minds. Rome thought it could break her spirit. Instead, it created a symbol of vengeance. But when emotion ruled her army, Roman logic set the trap. One leader fought with fury, the other with discipline, and only one understood the psychology of war. In 60 AD, the Iceni queen Boudica faced the Roman governor Gaius Suetonius Paulinus. On the battlefields of Britain, most historians focus on the brutal sacking of cities and the desperate last stand of a native revolt. But the real battle wasn't fought with swords and shields alone. It was fought here. It was a war between raw, unrestrained vengeance and cold, calculating Roman discipline. And victory would go to the commander, who could master not only his own army, but the mind of his enemy. This was never a war of policy. It was a war of psychology, ignited by a catastrophic miscalculation of the human spirit. When the king of the Iceni died, he naively willed his kingdom jointly to Rome and to his own daughters, hoping to preserve his line. The Roman procurator, Quintus Decianus, saw this not as a legal arrangement, but as an invitation to plunder. The result was an act of calculated humiliation designed to shatter the Iceni will. The kingdom was annexed, its nobles stripped of land, and the royal family subjected to a public, psychological dismantling. Boudica was flogged. Her 2 daughters were raped. Here, we must analyze the Roman cognitive error. To the Roman military mind, this was a standard. If Boutel, tool of statecraft, breaking a regional power's will to resist, but they had misjudged their subject. They did not break Boudica's will. They forged it into something new. They applied a trauma so profound that it erased the queen and created an avatar. The woman who emerged was no longer a politician seeking compromise. She was a vessel for a singular, purifying emotion: vengeance. This psychological transformation is the engine of the entire conflict. Boudica's leadership wasn't based on military experience or grand strategy. It was based on infectious, collective trauma. She became the living symbol of Roman depravity, and her personal fury resonated with the simmering resentment of tribes across the region. When she spoke, they didn't just hear a queen. They heard their own grievances given a terrifying, righteous voice. And where was the symbol of Roman discipline during this? Gaius Suetonius Paulinus was hundreds of miles away, invading the island of Anglesey. This act, in itself, reveals his psychological profile. Suetonius was a professional, a product of the rigid Roman military system. He was pragmatic, ruthless, and focused on strategic objectives. He wasn't subjugating a people. He was attacking their center of gravity, the spiritual and intellectual stronghold of the Druids. He was a man who believed that wars were won by dismantling systems, cutting off supply lines, and breaking the enemy's ideological core. He was a calculator, a man of logic, and he was utterly unprepared for an enemy fueled by pure, unadulterated emotion. The news of the revolt must have struck him as an illogical abstraction, until the 9th Legion, marching to save Camulodunum, was not just defeated, it was annihilated. This was the moment the psychological reality of his opponent became clear. This was not a border skirmish. This was an asymmetric threat. Boudica's army wasn't maneuvering, it was metastasizing, and its only objective was extermination. Suetonius, the man of systems, suddenly found his entire system on the verge of collapse. The annihilation of the 9th Legion was a cognitive shock to the Roman system. Suetonius Paulinus, the professional, had based his entire campaign on the assumption of a rational enemy. He was prepared for warriors seeking territory, or druids defending a faith. He was not prepared for an enemy whose sole strategic objective was psychological catharsis. Boudica's army was not a coherent military instrument. It was, as the historian Tacitus describes it, a furor, a wave of righteous madness. As Suetonius force-marched his legions, the battle-hardened 14th and detachments of the 20th southward, he was racing against this new, terrifying variable. The reports from Camulodunum, Colchester, would have confirmed his fears. The city wasn't just captured, it was methodically erased. The Temple of Claudius, a symbol of Roman divine authority, was besieged for 2 days and then torn down, its defenders slaughtered. This was not conquest. This was exorcism. Boudica's forces were symbolically killing the idea of Rome, and they were doing so with a ferocity that defied all military logic. This is the psychological crucible for Suetonius. He arrives at the thriving, undefended commercial port of Londinium. It is filled with Roman citizens, merchants, and pro-Roman Britons, the very people he is charged with protecting. They beg him to stay. Here, we witness a clash of two opposing forms of leadership. Boudica's strength was her empathy. She was the living embodiment of her people's trauma. She had to attack the symbols of Roman power to validate the rage that held her coalition together. Her strategy was dictated by her emotion. Suetonius, in contrast, was defined by his severe, almost inhuman, professional discipline. He looked at Londinium and saw not a city to be saved, but a tactical death trap. His force was perhaps 10,000 strong. Boudica's horde was swelling, a mass of over 100, perhaps 200. To fight in the narrow streets was to be enveloped, segmented, and destroyed piecemeal. It would be Camulodunum all over again. His decision reveals the core of his mind. He had to make an agonizing choice between his duty to the citizens and his responsibility to the province. Protecting Londinium was the emotionally correct choice. It was also a strategically fatal one. It would be a classic case of sunk cost fallacy, sacrificing his only operational army, the true center of gravity for Roman Britain, in a futile attempt to save a city that was already doomed. He made the call. He abandoned Londinium. We must pause to analyze the profound psychological fortitude this required. Suetonius, as Tacitus writes, was not moved by their tears and prayers. This is not the mark of a sociopath, but of a commander who has achieved a terrifying, necessary detachment. He had to intellectually master his own human empathy to preserve the strategic possibility of victory. He traded space for time. He sacrificed thousands of lives to buy the one thing he needed: the ability to choose the battlefield. He used Boudica's own psychology against her. He knew her rage was non-negotiable. He knew she could not bypass the symbolic prize of Londinium, just as she could not bypass Verulamium, St. Albans. Afterward, her need for vengeance made her predictable. As Suetonius and his legions slipped away, Boudica's horde fell upon Londinium and Verulamium, slaughtering a reported 70,000 people. The violence was total. Tacitus is clear. They took no prisoners, sold no captives, and went in for no ordinary trading of the spoils of war. They hurried on to slaughter. The gibbet, the fire, and the cross. This was Boudica's psychological peak, and her strategic nadir. She had allowed her rage to dictate her operational tempo, while she was annihilating civilian targets, fulfilling the psychological mandate of her followers. Suetonius was consolidating. He had his legions. He had a clear-eyed understanding of his enemy. And now, his discipline having absorbed the initial emotional shock, he stopped retreating. He turned and began to search for the perfect killing ground. Suetonius found his ground. The exact location is lost to history. Likely somewhere along the Roman road known as Watling Street. But its features are a case study in psychological warfare. He selected a narrow defile, a bottleneck, with dense woods protecting his flanks and a solid forest to his rear. He left only an open plain in front of him. This was not just a defensive position. It was a trap, engineered to exploit the very nature of his opponent. It was a physical manifestation of Roman logic, imposed upon a chaotic landscape. When Boudica's army arrived, it was a picture of fatal overconfidence. The Britons were so certain of victory, they brought their families in thousands of wagons, parking them in a great crescent at the rear of their force, to witness the final annihilation of Rome in Britain. Here, we see a cascade of cognitive biases. This was confirmation bias. Their previous victories over undefended cities proved their invincibility. It was groupthink, a collective emotional high that silenced any dissenting, cautious voices. Boudica, in her chariot, gave a speech that was pure emotion, a recounting of her personal wounds and a call for righteous vengeance. Suetonius, in contrast, delivered a speech of pure, cold professionalism. He ignored glory and patriotism, appealing only to their training. Ignore the din and empty threats of these savages. Tacitus records him saying, "In their ranks, you will find more women than warriors. They will break and run. Trust your training." He was telling them to trust the system. The battle was a horrific, inevitable piece of geometry. Suetonius held his legions in a tight, deep formation. He let the Britons, in their tens of thousands, charge across the open plain. He let their rage build, their momentum become unstoppable. And then, he channeled that entire ocean of humanity into his tiny, prepared bottleneck. The trap sprung. The Britons, crushed together by their own numbers, lost all ability to fight. They were a mob, not an army. At the perfect moment, Suetonius ordered the pilum volleys. The javelins rained down, breaking the British charge and creating a wall of dead and dying. Then, the legions advanced, not as individuals, but as a single, multi-legged killing machine. The scutum wall moving forward, the short gladius stabbing relentlessly from behind its protection. Emotion had met its antithesis. Rage broke against the wall of disciplined, systematic slaughter. The Britons' greatest asset, their numbers, became their greatest liability, clogging the field and preventing any retreat. The rout, when it came, was total, and it slammed directly into the crescent of wagons they had so confidently arranged. The trap was complete. Roman auxiliaries and cavalry swept the flanks, and the legionaries massacred not just the warriors, but the spectators. Boudica's revolt, born from a singular psychological trauma, died in a tactical bottleneck. Her leadership, based on shared fury, was a phenomenal tool for mobilization, but a catastrophic liability in execution. She had created a wave. And Suetonius, the cold disciplinarian, had simply built a wall. Boudica's vengeance was total in its expression, but it made her strategically predictable. Suetonius, in contrast, sacrificed cities and civilians to preserve his professional army, making an emotionally brutal but tactically superior choice. In his position, facing the destruction of Londinium. Could you have made the same cold calculation? Share your strategic assessment in the comments below.